QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Expense graphs with the help and use of Excel. You want to get into it? Try QuickBooks. They're owned by Intuit. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars practice file. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown, selecting the open windows list. We're now going to be putting together graphs related to the expense side of things, and these graphs will be expanding on, like all other reports, items that can be found on the major financial statements, that being the balance sheet and income statement or profit and loss. This focusing in on the income statement or profit and loss, and specifically the expense portion of it. So let's open up the profit and loss first. Reports drop down, company and financial, profit and loss standard, changing the dates up top from 01/01/21 to 02/28/21. There we have it. We're focusing down here on the expense side of things. Expenses can be a little bit confusing depending on how large your company is, because the expense categories are typically the longest type of category. There are more expense type accounts than, in other words, for most companies, than any other account type. And you might then have subcategorizations of your expense accounts, so that those subcategorizations can make it a little bit more difficult to kind of group this information or possibly export it to Excel so that you can then you can group it from there. One way to get around that, one way to make it easier to export, for example, might be to look at the trial balance rather than the profit and loss, because that's going to be the balance sheet on top of the income statement, but getting rid of all these subtotals. Let's open that by going to the reports drop down. We go down to the accounting and taxes trial balance. And then I'm going to go to 01/01/21 to 02/28/21. Same report. We have debits and credits, but they're not a problem because we're only focusing in on expenses, which are all debits. So if I was to export this worksheet to then create a chart from it, then I got all my expenses lined up without any kind of subcategories that I might be including the cost of goods sold subcategory we saw and the depreciation subcategory. Now, there is a report within QuickBooks to do the graph for the expenses, but you would have a lot more flexibility once again if you export it to Excel. Let's take a look at both methods here. I'll go through them a little bit more quickly because we have done this for other reports in the past. So if you want a more detailed explanation, you can go there for it. So we're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the company and financial, and I'm going to go to the graph within here, which is going to be the income and expense graph. Income and expense graph. And then I'm going to change the dates, so stuff will show up, and that's going to be 01/01/21 to 02/28/21. Say OK. There's stuff. Now I'm going to change up top or down below. We can either have the income, which we saw in a prior presentation, and now expenses. So if we go to the expense item, total expenses are now at the $50,697. Let's see if we can tie that out to our income statement and see if it makes sense. We can say, oh, where does that come from? Because once again, if I just give this to someone or put it in a presentation, someone will ask me, where is that on the financial statement, right? And we want to kind of be able to know that so we don't stand there frozen. So we're going to then say that this is going to be the 18753.98. And then the cost of goods sold is an expense included here. So cost of goods sold is going to be the 31,292. That gives us the 50,045, and I believe they're going to include the interest expense down here in other as well. So plus the 651.84. Those are all the expenses that are now included in this graph, and that ties out to the 50,697.82. So there's our expense graph. You can't do much with this graph, but we can copy and paste it into a PowerPoint, for example, or cut and paste it. We took a look at examples of doing that in a prior presentation, so I won't go through that again. But you might want to reconstruct this in Excel, and since we're going to pull this from a different report, I'll work through that. What if we were trying to reconstruct this in Excel so I can do something other than this one static format of the pie chart? We could then go to I'm going to go to the trial balance now, export this information, snip it down to what we want on the expense side of things, and then we can make our own chart. We can make our own chart here. So we're going to go to the Excel drop down. I'm going to create a new worksheet, and then I'm going to put it into an existing workbook. If you don't have a workbook set up, then you can have a new workbook. You do need Excel in order to do this. I'm going to put it in the existing workbook, and I'm going to say that I want this one, our This is where we've been putting all the Excel items. If you're planning on making one PDF file that you can provide to a client, then you can do this format for it so that you can print from Excel to a PDF, which will have all of your reports on it. I'm going to maximize the screen. I'm going to pull this tab to the right now. So there's our trial balance. I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to call this the expense graph. And then I'm just going to do our standard formatting. I'll do this a little bit quicker because we've seen similar formatting in the past. But so I'm going to go to the page layout tab. Okay. And then I'm going to remove these header. Maybe I want the header here to be expense graph, like so. And then I'll remove the splits, go into the view tab up top, Windows, get rid of the split, and then back to the prior one. And so what I want, the only data that I want is everything on the expense and down. So that includes cost of goods sold on down, and I want this one, and that's it. This is all I want, this stuff. So everything else I'm just gonna delete. So I'm gonna go from here all the way up, all these rows, and just right click and delete. Don't need that stuff. And this one I don't want either, so I'm gonna just click on that one and delete. Let's make this a little larger. I'm at 100%. Let's bring it back up. You can hold down Control and scroll up to increase the size as well. Don't want the total either. I'm gonna click on the total, remove that, delete. And then if I was to add up all the expenses, we're at the 4,000 or the 50,697. If I go to QuickBooks, does that line up to what they have here? We've got the 50,697. All right, so I didn't mess anything up. And then I'm going to remove column A. Don't need column A. We can remove that. And then if we have a whole lot of expense, well, the next thing I want to do is sort this by the highest to the lowest. You can do that by selecting A to B, and then we can go to the data tab. We can then sort here. I like to make a table out of it, so I'm less likely to kind of mess anything up. So I'm going to make a table, selecting the data, insert, table, and there it is. I'm just going to say, there it is. Now they give me a little drop down that helps me to sort it, and it's less likely that I kind of mess up the number to the wrong account, like mess up the data, jumble the data. So I'm going to hit the drop down here, and I'm going to want to see it from Z to A. There it is. Now I might only want the top 10 expenses, so I might say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Miscellaneous on down, I'm going to group them into their own category. So miscellaneous on down is going to be other. And then I'm going to highlight those three. That adds up to just simply the 323.83. So 323.83. Then I'm going to remove everything below it because it's now included in other. Selecting those columns and delete. And then we can make our own table, our own pie chart by just selecting these items, going to the insert. We can then create the pie chart. There's the pie chart. We can do a lot of formatting here, so I can remove the title because I have that on the title of the page. But I won't get into a lot of detail on the formatting because we've seen these in prior presentations, and you can go into an Excel course to see how to format. But just note the formatting options are extensive in Excel as compared to just a static chart. If you want to print this entire thing out, then you could make this, put this over the data so you don't have to show the data. That's one way you can do it. And then if I wanted to print this entire thing out, I can print it out and it'll print as a PDF file if I print it to a PDF printer with this data shown here. I'm going to remove that so you can see the data. Or you can put this on another tab. I can right click on this, copy. I can put it on another tab. And I could say that this is going to be the expense graph. And I'll call this one, it already exists. Expense graph. I'll put a 1 on it. And this one is the expense graph data. And so I'll put the data there, and then I'll just paste the actual graph. I'll just paste it like this for now. Go to the next view so I can see how big the page is. Prior view. And then I can expand this basically to a page. Then I can hide this column if I don't want it to print out. When I print to a PDF printer, right click, and I can say hide that. And then if I was to print this, I can say, all right, what would happen if I went to File and I print this whole thing to a PDF so I can then email one document with all my stuff in it. So I'm going to say I want to print the entire workbook. The entire workbook here, and there's 19 pages because I got these beginning pages. I got to delete those. That's ridiculous. So we got to delete those. But there's our balance sheet. There's the balance sheet. There's the comparative balance sheet. There's the income statement. There's the comparative income statement. Virtual analysis. And here's all of our charts that we have been putting together. And then our final chart is going to be, of course, on page 19. We got kind of a long sheet here, page 19. So there it is. And notice the data tab, there it is, page 19. And so it should be skipping over basically the data tab. So this is not, it skipped over the data tab. So we can then print this out to one PDF file and not have the data tab on it. So then I'm going to unhide the data tab, which is in between these two items by holding down Shift, selecting both of them, right click and unhide, and say OK. So there's our data tab. So when you see this table, you can see kind of how it is constructed. So you can apply the same principles to a whole bunch of other reports. So anything you want to put into a graph format, you can export the data. It doesn't even have to be anything that has a database program. Anything that has a database program, you can somehow export the data and make some graph out of it and impress people with, the graphs. Put the numbers into a graph. You have a lot more flexibility to do that with Excel, and pretty much any kind of database program, whether it be financial database or other, can allow you to export to Excel where you can make adjustments and build graphs